Bienvenue à
logistics
tous,
and
mesdames et
housekeeping
messieurs,
remarks.
chers collègues,
Welcome,
chers
ladies and
participants.
gentlemen, dear
Je suis
participants,
ravie
dear
de vous
colleagues,
accueillir aujourd'hui
and
pour
I'm
notre
really glad to
webinaire de
welcome you
90
to
minutes
our
intitulé
90
Mesurer la
minute
santé et le
webinar
bien-être
called
à l'école
Measuring
à l'aide
Health and
d'enquêtes à
Wellbeing
grande
at
échelle
School
sur
in Large
l'apprentissage des
Scale
élèves.
Learning
Tout d'abord, je
Assessments.
tiens à vous remercier de
First
votre
of all, I'd
présence
like to thank
assez
you
conséquente.
for
Nous avons
being
reçu
here
à peu
in such
près 500
great
demandes
numbers. We've
d'inscription
got
et surtout votre engagement
500
envers un
requests
sujet qui est
for
très important. Je me
uh,
présente, je m'appelle Stéphanie Lett et je
registration. I am Stephanie Lett and I am a program specialist at the Technical Cooperation Division of IIEP in Paris. And I basically have many responsibilities. I'm involved in projects, technical assistance, training, and I'm also an IAP expert on various themes linked to the quality of education and learning assessments, indicators, monitoring, and well-being. My role here to is to facilitate the webinar, and I'm also the coordinator of a course called Using Learning Data to Assess ODD for Progress. This is a bilingual course that's running over 10 weeks. So this webinar is part of this series. And we organize this webinar with experts every week. So we have decided to basically make this webinar available to everyone because we feel that sharing knowledge is really important to further our understanding in the field of education. And this is also a way for you to understand what's happening in our specialized courses. The course I'm coordinating aims at developing uh, skills in SDG4, and we are basically focusing on the, using learning data coming from various information sources, mainly national surveys, regional surveys. So these are large scale surveys to understand and improve the quality of education. So something you also have information on the ULAD course by clicking on the link in the chat. It basically takes you to the description of this course. Now, we also look at various key themes, the various cycles of planning and how education quality fits into the education planning cycle. And we'll also see how national large scale surveys on learning assessments can also be a valuable tool to better understand the education system. We also focus on the use of this learning assessment data to better plan education and also guide education policy. So it's not just about understanding school success, but also various other factors. We also are going to look at health and well-being of students. So this is the in we'd be at the 2050 agenda, and we really have to ask the question: do we have comparable and reliable data to assess progress? And we also have to better understand and plan education. Today, we're going to focus on an aspect which is often neglected but is gaining visibility and importance, which is health and well-being of pupils. So, s- pupils in
dans leur
good health can
apprentissage et de réaliser
actually
leur
take
plein
part in the
potentiel.
learning process
Donc, au cours
and
de ce
realize
webinaire,
their
nous
full
allons examiner
potential. So
comment des
during
données
this
collectées à
webinar, we're going
partir
to
de
see
deux enquêtes
how
régionales à grande
data
échelle,
collected
à
from two
savoir le
large-scale
PASSEC et le
surveys, PASSEC
CPLM,
and
donc une enquête
CPLM.
en Afrique et
So
une autre
one is
enquête
a
menée en Asie du
large-scale
Sud-Est,
survey
peuvent nous aider
conducted
à
in
mieux
Africa, and the
comprendre
other
ces
one in
dimensions
Southeast
essentielles
Asia.
de
So this will
l'éducation.
help us understand
Donc,
the
nous avons
essential
la chance,
dimensions
d'entendre
of
des
education.
experts
So we're
qui vont
really
nous partager leur
glad
expérience,
to
leur
welcome our experts
perspective
today, and they're going to share share
sur
their
les manières dont
perspectives
ces données
on
sont
how
collectées.
this
Donc, je
data is
souhaite
collected.
aussi,
I
dans cette
also
occasion, là maintenant,
would
saluer la cohorte de
like
participants
to
de cette année,
greet
donc qui participent
the
à ce cours
cohort
spécialisé,
of
qui sont parmi
participants
nous.
participating
Nous
in
avons un
the
programme riche,
course.
stimulant, je
We
l'espère,
have a
et je
very
suis impatiente
stimulating and rich
d'entendre nos
program, and I'm
intervenants pour partager
really
les
eager to
connaissances, les
uh,
expériences. Et je vous
hear
encourage à
our
poser des
speakers.
questions,
I
à
really would
participer
encourage
activement aux
you to
discussions via le
participate
chat
in the
si vous avez
discussions,
des
ask
questions. Vous pouvez
questions
poser
via
vos
the chat.
questions en français et en
You
anglais, il
can
n'y a pas de
ask your
souci.
questions
Et
in
pour nos
French or
participants, vous pouvez
English,
utiliser Google
and
Doc.
you can
Avant
also
de
ask your
commencer
questions in the
la
Google Doc.
séance,
Before
j'ai le
starting the
plaisir de passer
session,
la
I'm
parole à
also
Madame
glad to
Béatrice
give
Ponte,
the
qui est notre
floor to
responsable
Beatrice Pont,
globale de
who
la
is
formation ici
our
à l'IPE, qui
global
nous
head of
fait l'honneur
training in
donc
IP,
de
who
prononcer un mot de bienvenue.
is going to say a
Béatrice,
few words.
Merci
Beatrice, you've
beaucoup.
got the floor. Thank you
I'm
so
going to
much.
speak in English. Um, Thank you very much, Stephanie. Welcome, everybody. As the head of IIP Global Campus, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this open seminar, this webinar that is part of the Global Campus course using data to monitor SDG for progress. And I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you what we have developed at IIP UNESCO. We have recently launched a new global campus that provides courses for people involved in education policy and planning, whether policymakers, planners, people working in NGOs or international organizations, or academics working in the field. And we have a catalog of courses that is rich, and it starts from our foundations programs on education sector planning to more specialized courses such as this one, which we call ULAD, or another one that Stephanie will be teaching, which is Education Monitoring and Information Systems, another course on early childhood education and care planning, another one on aligning budgets with education goals, or our new recent one on education leadership seminar that focuses on implementation of education reforms. These courses, they are very practical. They may be bilingual, as this one in English, French, or we may only do it in English, French, or Spanish, or Portuguese. And what's new from all of these courses is that they are really for professionals, but they are receiving IIP micro-credentials. These new micro-credentials, they are stackable to obtain diplomas, and they will be portable in a world where skills are now our new passports for jobs, for movements around the world. So it's quite important to have these. So we have joined the world of micro credentials. And what makes us stand out is the quality of our instruction that is based on our instructors, but very much focused on practitioners' needs, your needs, those of you who have joined us. You're working in the field, you're working in ministries of education, NGOs, and our learning is really focused on you. And so we don't provide so much self-paced. It's rather we engage directly with you, our participants. We guide you, we exchange, and there's quite a very important peer learning dimension from as we have participants from all over the world, actually. I'm very much looking forward to today's open webinar on a key topic for education systems, how to measure health and well-being of our students. This is becoming more and more important, and we need to understand the determinants or the factors behind student learning, and health and well-being are at the heart. So I want to thank Hilaire and Alejandro Ibanez from Confemen and from CAPLM, who are going to present how they are measuring this, and thank Stephanie as well and the team, the IIP team, for including this topic, this very important and more prevalent topic for us in the agenda of this course. So thank you and good learning.
Thank you so much, Béatrice, for this welcome message. Merci beaucoup, Béatrice. Je vais
Thank
switch
you
en
so much.
français.
I'm going to now
Donc,
speak in
maintenant,
French.
entrons dans le cœur du sujet.
Now we are
Comme je
going to
l'ai
go
souligné,
to
mentionné,
the
nous allons
crux of the
aborder donc la
matter.
question
We're
de la
going to
santé et le
look
bien-être
at
des
health
élèves en
and
milieu scolaire, hein. Pas
well-being at
simplement des élèves, mais on peut aussi
school
parler aussi du personnel enseignant.
in
Il y a deux grandes enquêtes
large
régionales,
scale
une en Afrique et une
learning
autre en Asie du
assessments.
Sud-Est.
So there are two learning
Mais
assessments,
avant de
one in
donner la
Africa, one in
parole
Southeast Asia. But
à
before
nos
giving the
invités, je
floor
vais
to
juste poser
our
un petit
guest,
peu un cadre,
I'm
hein.
just
Je vais
going
introduire
to
brièvement ce que nous sous-entendons
introduce
par santé
what
bien-être
we
et aussi ce
mean
qui est
by health and
attendu via ces
well-being
grandes
and
enquêtes
what
régionales sur les
do
acquis
we
des élèves.
expect from these
Tout d'abord,
large-scale
ici à
learning
l'EPE, c'est
assessments.
vrai que nous
So at
bénéficions
the
d'une assez longue
IEP,
expérience, une
we have a
expertise
lot of
reconnue dans le domaine de
experience
la
and
santé et du bien-être,
expertise in
pas
health
simplement
and
ici à
well-being,
l'EPE
not just
UNESCO, mais
in
aussi au
IEP
siège.
UNESCO,
Nous
but
travaillons avec des
also
collègues dans le domaine.
we
Par exemple, nous
work
avons un
with
portail
colleagues
entièrement
in
dédié qui s'appelle le Centre de
at the head
ressources sur la
office.
santé et
We have
l'éducation. Vous allez
a
avoir le
center
lien
for
sur le chat. Je vous
resources
invite
for education. The link will be put on the
à jeter
chat,
un
and
œil
please
dessus.
go
Je suis
and
moi-même coordinatrice
consult
d'un
it.
autre programme dans
I
la
am the
l'AOC
coordinator of another
dans ce domaine-là.
program
Donc, vous pouvez
in
voir, nous
this
sommes
field.
vraiment
So
engagés
you see, we
dans ce domaine qui est très
really
riche.
committed
Un
to
premier constat que
this
j'ai observé en
field.
travaillant dans ce domaine,
One
souvent on m'a dit, mais
observation
Stéphanie,
I
pourquoi tu
have
travailles dans la santé? On
seen
est
is
dans
that
l'éducation.
people ask me, why are
Et
we
c'est un
working
autre
on health?
constat que j'ai
We are in the
entendu
field of
il y a
education.
2 semaines.
Another
Il y avait
thing I
un grand
heard
sommet sur
2 weeks
la
ago, there was a
nutrition, donc au siège de
summit
l'UNESCO.
on
À
nutrition at
savoir, en
the
général,
UNESCO head
on parle
office,
d'éducation et on
and
parle de
we
la
talk
santé.
of
Nous avons deux ministères, l'éducation
education
et la
and
santé, qui sont perçus comme deux
health.
entités
So
distinctes,
they are
un peu
perceived as two
cloisonnées,
different
pas souvent
entities in
interconnectés,
silos and not
comme deux silos.
interconnected.
Donc c'est vrai qu'il est crucial de
So
toujours
it's really
de réfléchir
important
ensemble
to
comment relier
think
efficacement
together how
ces deux domaines. Et même ici
we
à
can build
l'IPE, ou même mes
bridges
collègues
between
m'ont
the
dit,
two
mais tu travailles sur
fields.
la santé,
Colleagues
mais pourquoi? Ce n'est
at
pas si
IEP
important
says,
que
why
ça.
are you working on
Mais non,
health?
c'est
Because
un
it's not
enjeu extrêmement
important. On the
important
contrary, it's an
pour
extremely
différentes
important stake
raisons.
for various reasons.
Tout d'abord, il est
First
essentiel,
of all,
comme
it is
je l'ai mentionné,
really important, as I
de ne pas se limiter
mentioned,
simplement à
to not
l'évaluation des
limit
compétences
yourself
académiques des élèves.
to
Simplement
measuring the
regarder des niveaux de
skills, the
compétences,
academic
bon, c'est
skills.
intéressant,
Looking at the
mais
skills
ce
is
qui est le plus
interesting, but
intéressant, à
what's
mon avis,
really
c'est de
more
comprendre les
important
déterminants.
is to
Pourquoi ces
understand
niveaux
the
de compétences,
determinants,
mais aussi de
why this
comprendre
level of
aussi
skill,
d'autres
and
éléments
also
contextuels, la
understand
santé et le
other
bien-être de nos
background
élèves,
elements
qui jouent
like
un rôle
health and
fondamental
well-being
dans
that
la
have a
capacité à apprendre et
preponderant
à
role to
réussir.
play in the
Rappelez-vous,
capacity
quand
to
vous
learn
étiez jeune, c'était
and
important
succeed.
d'être en
When
bonne
you were young,
santé,
it's really important to
d'être
be in good
positif à l'école,
health.
que lorsqu'on était malade, on
And
avait
when you were
du
sick,
mal à
when you were
suivre.
ill, it's
Voilà,
really
il
hard to
s'agit juste
keep
d'un
up.
exemple. Donc, il est
And it's
vraiment
just an example.
crucial
So
d'intégrer
it's
aussi
really important
cette
to
dimension de santé et
factor in
bien-être.
this
Alors, je
dimension
voudrais
of health and
reposer
well-being. I
le cadre,
want
à savoir qu'est-ce
to
qu'on entend par
now
santé et bien-être en milieu scolaire.
define what
Pour
health and
moi, j'ai
well-being at
identifié trois
school is.
catégories
I've
essentielles, trois
identified
dimensions,
three
peut-être qu'il y en a d'autres, à
dimensions.
savoir,
Perhaps there are
premièrement, un
others.
environnement
First
scolaire
of
sûr et
all,
inclusif qui favorise la santé et le
safe
bien-être des
and
élèves, pas
inclusive
seulement, mais
school
aussi de tout
environment,
personnel en milieu scolaire.
promoting the
Donc,
health and
un
well-being of not
environnement,
just students but
ça
also the
inclut des
staff.
infrastructures
It
adaptées,
includes in
des
adapted
espaces verts, des
infrastructure,
installations sportives, des cantines, par exemple, mais pas
parks,
simplement. Ça peut être
canteen,
aussi
sports infrastructure,
d'avoir un code de
and
conduite.
also
Voilà,
a
comment est-ce qu'on doit
code
se
of conduct.
comporter, pas
How
simplement en tant
should
qu'élève,
one
en tant
behave, not
qu'enseignant,
just
pour
as
bien
a student,
apprendre.
but
Cela
also
permet
as a
aussi
teacher in
d'éviter
the
de
school. And this
sensibiliser à
also
la nutrition.
helps
Cela
raise
permet aussi d'avoir
awareness
une
on
culture scolaire positive,
nutrition,
donc
to
lutter
have a
aussi à
positive
tout ce qui a
school
à voir avec la violence
culture,
en milieu scolaire.
and also
Donc,
control
créer
and
un cadre
check
de vie sain.
school
Donc, l'école
violence.
est un
So
lieu
we
aussi
really have
d'apprentissage.
a
Donc, afin de
healthy environment.
diminuer les
Now,
comportements à
in
risque
order
et
to
aussi améliorer la
bring down
concentration, la performance
risky
académique.
behavior
Une
and
deuxième
enhance
dimension
school performance,
qui, à
this
mon
is
avis, est
really important.
importante, c'est
And
tout
the
ce qui a à voir
second
avec l'éducation
dimension
basée sur les
is
compétences en matière
everything
de santé et
based
bien-être. En
on
général, cette éducation est
education,
transversale, est
based
inclue dans
on
diverses
skills.
disciplines. Cela
This
inclut
is
la nutrition,
cross-cutting.
l'activité physique, la
It's
gestion du
included in
stress, prévention des
nutrition. It
maladies. On
involves
parle aussi beaucoup aujourd'hui de
prevention of
santé
diseases,
mentale.
stress
Mais vous
management,
voyez,
and
donc,
we
tous
talk a
ces
lot
domaines-là
about
sont
mental health. So
transversales
all
et sont
these are
transversales à
cross-cutting
différentes disciplines.
fields and
Et bien sûr,
cover several
cela permet
subjects.
d'aider
And
les
this
élèves à mieux
also
réfléchir à
helps
leur choix de
students to
vie et
better
apprend
think of
aussi
their lifestyle
à les
choices
préparer à adopter des
and
comportements
prepare
beaucoup
them
plus sains
to
et
adopt
aussi
healthy
promouvoir le bien-être
behavior
au sein de la
and
communauté.
promote
Enfin, une troisième
well-being in the
dimension qui est la
community.
dimension de
A
service
third
de santé scolaire, donc en
dimension
milieu scolaire.
is
C'est-à-dire, cela
school
englobe des
health.
ressources, des programmes au sein
Now,
des établissements pour soutenir la santé
it's
physique et
about
mentale des élèves.
basically
Cela peut
keeping
inclure des
healthy your
soins,
mind and your
des
body. It
programmes de
includes
vaccination, des
vaccination
initiatives liées à la
programs,
nutrition.
initiatives
Et
linked
en
to
général, vous avez
nutrition,
vu, vous-même
and
ayant
you have
été élève, qu'il y avait
seen as a
des
student
professionnels
that
de
there
santé scolaire au
were
sein
health
de l'école qui jouent
professionals
un
in the
rôle aussi
school
important en
who also
identifiant des
play an
problèmes et en
extremely
orientant
important
les
role in
familles.
identifying
Donc, je vais m'arrêter là.
problems. So I'm going to stop
Donc,
here.
l'idée aujourd'hui, c'est de
So the
réfléchir comment ces
idea
grandes
is
enquêtes
to
à
understand
grande
how
échelle
these
collectent des
large-scale
informations liées
assessments collect
à cette
information, collect
thématique-là. Alors bien sûr,
data
je ne pense pas
related to
qu'ils
these
collectent toutes
themes.
ces
Now,
informations-là,
I don't think they
mais ils
collect all
collectent
this information, but they collect what we
certains points importants. Et justement, ça
certain
sera une
important
question que
points,
je vais poser tout
and
à
this
l'heure,
is a
c'est le
question I'm
pourquoi.
going to ask.
Mais revenons un petit peu à ces
Why?
enquêtes à grande échelle.
And let's
J'aimerais
come
aussi
back
poser
to
le
these
cadre.
learning
Elles ont
assessments,
quatre
large-scale
points
learning
communs.
assessments.
En
Now, they
général,
have
elles
four
suivent à peu
common
près les mêmes
points. They have
objectifs, à
the same
savoir regarder les
objectives, that
performances des
is,
élèves,
to look at
mais elles
pupil
ont quatre points
performance,
assez spécifiques
and
par rapport
they
à d'autres enquêtes.
also
D'abord, ce
have
sont des enquêtes
specific,
comparatives de systèmes
they are
éducatifs qui permettent
comparative
d'évaluer les performances des élèves entre les pays, certes,
surveys.
pas pour comparer les pays, non, non. Il s'agit
And the
aussi
idea is not to
d'apprendre ce qui se
compare
passe
countries,
entre les
but
différents
also
pays, de regarder les
learn
évolutions
from
dans le
each
temps
other,
et
look
surtout
at the changes over
d'explorer
time,
les
and
facteurs contextuels et
explore the
déterminants qui
contextual
influent
factors
l'éducation.
that
Donc,
influence
qu'est-ce qui
education.
permet
So,
d'améliorer
what
l'éducation?
helps
Donc, elles
us
fournissent des données
improve in
essentielles pour
education? So, this
l'élaboration de politiques
data
éducatives
is really
éclairées.
important to
Je suis sûre que dans vos
uh,
pays, vous avez entendu parler de différentes enquêtes
have
internationales ou
successful policies.
régionales.
You've actually
Par
heard of
exemple,
these
parfois on parle
international
beaucoup
or
du
regional
PISA,
large-scale
comment ces données
surveys
ont
like
influencé
PISA,
aussi
how
les politiques
the data
éducatives.
has
Mais pas
influenced
simplement.
education
Ces
policy, but
enquêtes
not
aussi
just.
favorisent la
These
collaboration, les échanges. Vous
surveys
allez voir tout à l'heure
also
avec les
promote
présentations de
collaboration and
nos deux
exchange.
invités
You'll
experts.
see
Et aussi
with
à
the
renforcer la
presentation,
capacité
and they
technique des
also
équipes nationales.
hone
C'est-à-dire,
the
c'est pas
technical
simplement des
skills of
enquêtes
national teams.
pour
So these are
collecter des
not
données, mais c'est aussi un
surveys
renforcement des
merely
capacités.
to collect
Donc,
data,
ces
but
enquêtes nous
also
fournissent
to
des
do
données très
capacity
précieuses,
building. So
très
these
détaillées
surveys
sur
give
les
us
acquis,
very
mais aussi
valuable
sur toute
data
dimension.
on learning assessments and other
Donc, je vous
dimensions as
remercie de
well.
votre
So I'm
présence et de
going
votre
to
participation.
thank you
Je vous
again
souhaite
for your
un bon webinaire
participation. I'm
enrichissant
going to
et
wish you a
fructueux.
very
Et sans plus attendre,
fruitful webinar.
je
And
vais
without
céder la
further
parole
ado,
à
I'm
notre
going to
premier
give the floor
intervenant.
to our first
Comme je l'ai
speaker,
mentionné, n'hésitez pas à
who,
utiliser notre
and
chat si vous
please
avez des
use
questions.
the chat if you have any
Donc, je vais donner
questions.
à présent la
So I'm going
parole
to give
à
the floor to Hilaire
Podote, si je
Hunk
prononce bien,
Podote,
qui
if
est
I
le
haven't
coordinateur du
mispronounced your name,
PASEC,
who is the
donc
PASEC
qui est le programme
coordinator,
d'analyse des systèmes
who
éducatifs de la conférence des ministres
so,
délégation des États et gouvernements de la francophonie, la Confémène,
so
donc qui lance des enquêtes, si je ne
they
me trompe pas, hein, il me semble depuis
if they've
1991, qui
been
a plus de 34
actually
ans d'existence.
doing this
Mais
for the
Hilaire travaille
past
donc
since 1994,
au sein
and Hilaire
du PASEC depuis
works
2018.
has been working with
Hilaire donc,
PASEC
est
since
ingénieur
2018.
statisticien
He
économiste
is
diplômé de
a
l'École nationale de statistique et
statistician
d'économie appliquée,
engineer. He has a
l'ENSA
diploma
à Abidjan, qui
from
effectue en ce
in
moment son
Sava
doctorat.
in
Donc,
Abidjan.
je lui
He is
souhaite bon
now
courage.
preparing his doctorate,
Il a également été chef
and
d'études
he
à l'Institut
also
national
was
de
head of
statistique et
study
d'analyse
at the
économique du Bénin. Il a été
National Institute of
consultant dans
Statistics in
l'évaluation de
Benin. He was a
l'apprentissage au Mali et
consultant
RDC. Donc, vous
in
voyez,
Mali and
il
DRC.
a énormément
So Hida
d'expérience
has a
et
lot
aujourd'hui
of
le coordinateur du
experience, and
PASEC.
he is
Donc,
the
je vais
PASEC
donner la
coordinator
parole à
today. I'm
Hilaire,
going to give the
qui va vous
floor to
présenter
Hilaire,
le
who's going to
PASEC,
give you
mais aussi
a
donc, les
presentation
données
of
qui sont
PASEC and
collectées dans
also the
ce
data
domaine-là, à savoir
that's
la
been
santé et le
collected in
bien-être.
the field of health and
Hilaire?
well-being. Hilaire, you've got the
Merci
floor.
Stéphanie. Je pense
Thank you,
que
Stephanie.
tu as déjà tout dit sur moi. Je
I
n'ai
think you've
pas
actually said
d'autres
everything
choses à
about me,
ajouter.
and I
Je
don't
voudrais
have
remercier
anything to add.
d'abord
I would
l'IP
like to first
UNESCO
of all
vraiment
thank
pour cette
IP
opportunité
UNESCO for
qui
this
nous est offerte
opportunity
de présenter un peu ce que nous
to
faisons
present
dans
what
la
we're
thématique qui est
doing.
développée aujourd'hui. Et merci aussi pour les
And
échanges sur
thank
d'autres
you
dimensions qu'on a déjà fait dans le cadre
also
du cours ULAD que nous avons eu la semaine
for
dernière. Et donc,
including
merci vraiment, merci à l'IP
health and
UNESCO
well-being
pour cette
in the ULAD
collaboration-là.
course. So thank you
Et
for this
donc, pour
collaboration.
commencer, je
Now,
voudrais
to start
d'abord
off with, I would like to first of
rappeler le
all
contexte.
give you
D'abord,
a
dire que le
reminder of
PASEC,
the
c'est un
background.
programme
PASEC
de la
is
Confémène.
actually a
La Confémène
confirmation
qui est la
program.
conférence des
Confirmation
ministres de
is the
l'éducation et de la
conference of
francophonie.
ministers of education of
Et donc,
French-speaking
c'est une conférence
countries.
ministérielle qui regroupe
So
44 États et
this
gouvernements dans le monde entier,
includes 44
dans les
states and
différents
governments
continents,
in the
et qui est une
world.
organisation
And
intergouvernementale
it's an
qui a
intergovernmental
pour but
organization.
d'animer
Its
la
mission
concertation
is
entre
to
les
inform
ministres,
its members
échanger
on the evolution
sur
of
des sujets
education
importants autour des
systems and ongoing
politiques
reforms to
éducatives,
facilitate
prendre,
consultation between ministers
prendre
and experts
des
in order
décisions
to
importantes pour l'avenir de
uh,
l'éducation dans les différents pays
support
et faire des
education,
partages
support
d'expériences
regional and
entre les
international
pays pour que
education policies,
chaque pays puisse
share
apprendre l'un de l'autre pour
experience
voir comment on peut
amongst
dupliquer
countries so
des
that
programmes qui
each
marchent dans d'autres contextes
country
et
so that each country can
dans d'autres contextes
learn from
également.
the other
Donc
one.
voilà un peu
So
rapidement la
very
Confémène.
quickly,
Et
this is
donc
what
le PASEC,
Conferment
qui est ce
is. Now,
programme qui est
what's
créé en
PASEC? PASEC
1991,
is
vraiment avait
a
pour but de
program
avoir accompagné pouvoir
that
accompagner la
aims
Confémène
at
dans la prise de décision
supporting
qui se base
Confirmation
sur des
in
données probantes.
taking
Parce que vous savez que
decisions
pour prendre des
on
décisions, faut se
data,
baser sur
using data.
des données réelles. On ne peut
So
pas prendre des
on
décisions
real
vraiment
data. So
à la hâte, comme ça, sans une
we do
analyse
not take
approfondie. Et donc, le PASEC,
decisions
depuis
in a
1991, vraiment
hasty
fait des
way.
évaluations
So
nationales diagnostiques dans
this
différents
has
pays.
PASIC has been
Et
around
depuis
since
2012,
2014
la
and
méthodologie
since
du
20
programme a évolué pour aller
the
vers des évaluations
the
comparatives
program has
entre différents
changed.
pays pour que chaque
We
pays puisse apprendre d'autres
are
contextes pour voir un
comparing
peu,
the results
voilà,
so that each
quel est l'état
country
du
can
système négatif
actually
d'un pays à un
learn
autre et qu'est-ce qu'on
from
peut
each
apprendre,
other.
voilà, des
And
résultats de
what
tous les pays. Et
can
donc, il ne
we
s'agit
learn
pas de faire une
from the
évaluation
results?
qui permet de se
It's not
classer, de classer les pays, qui est
about
premier, qui est dernier, non,
classifying or
mais
ranking
c'est
the
de pouvoir
countries.
permettre aux pays de pouvoir apprendre dans
It's
différents contextes. Et donc, c'est
basically
dans cette
help
dynamique-là que
us
le PASEC
learn
a
about
réalisé
the
déjà deux
various
évaluations comparatives en
contexts. So there are
2014 sur 10 pays
so
et en
in
2019 sur 14
2014 there were
pays.
10
Et actuellement, il
countries.
y
In
a
2019 there were
le
14
principe
countries,
d'évaluation qui est en cours là,
and
qui concerne 21
the
pays.
current
Je vais revenir
PASIC
là-dessus tout à l'heure. Mais
is
le PASEC,
includes
ce n'est
21
pas seulement de faire
countries.
des évaluations des
Now,
enquêtes, c'est aussi de
PASIC is not
pouvoir
about just
renforcer les
large
capacités
scale
des acteurs nationaux.
surveys. It's also
Parce que
about
quand on fait des
honing the
évaluations, ce n'est
capacities
pas
of
seulement le passé équipe
national
internationale
actors,
qui
national
mène l'évaluation,
stakeholders.
mais c'est les pays. Et
It's
donc,
the
c'est une
countries that
co-construction entre
are
la Confémène et les
also
pays. C'est les pays
being
qui sont au cœur. Et
assessed.
donc, quand on voit le PASEC aujourd'hui, ce n'est
When
pas
you
seulement
see
l'équipe
PASIC
technique
today,
qui
it's not
réfléchit à tous les
just
contenus, mais
the
c'est
technical
aussi les
team
pays qui
that's
réfléchissent
thinking about the
à toutes les
content.
dimensions-là. Tout ce que nous mettons dans les instruments, dans les livres de la
We
méthodologie,
also
c'est
look at
construit avec les pays pour pouvoir adapter à
what
tous les
is
contextes
being
possibles.
done in
Je vais
other
revenir là-dessus tout à
countries,
l'heure.
and it's
Et
all
aussi, c'est l'appui
designed with the
à
country
l'exploitation
itself.
des résultats. Parce que quand on fait une évaluation, il ne
Supporting
s'agit pas de faire
countries,
des rapports et de les mettre dans les tiroirs.
PASIC supports
C'est de
countries
pouvoir
in
utiliser les
using
résultats que nous allons
results
trouver pour voir comment on
to
oriente les politiques
steer
éducatives,
the
comment on
education
oriente les actions.
systems,
Et donc, les données
to
du passé doivent servir à quelque chose. Et donc, le passé
steer action
accompagne
plans. So
l'exploitation
PASIC
de ces
basically
résultats-là
supports
et
these
l'utilisation à
countries
travers ce que nous
to use the
appelons la mise
results.
en place de feuilles de route et
And
de plans
there
d'action
is
pour
a
voir comment,
roadmap that
après les
is
résultats,
set up
comment les pays
after
exploitent les
the
résultats
results.
pour
And
relever les
PASIC
défis.
basically
Voilà, donc
helps
comment a
the
évolué la prise en compte
countries use
des
the results to
recommandations,
rise
comment
to
les
the
pays ont utilisé les
challenges.
résultats pour pouvoir vraiment avancer dans les lacunes parfois que nous avons
And
trouvées. Et donc, dans cette
sometimes
dynamique-là, la COFMEN a mis en place un nouveau programme qu'on
there
appelle le
are
PACT, programme d'appui sommet à
weaknesses
sa forme
that the
d'éducation,
PASIC aims
qui reprend
to
les
get
résultats du
rid
passé
of.
pour pouvoir faire des projets pilotes dans les pays
There are also
pour
pilot
accompagner
studies
encore beaucoup plus
carried
fortement les
out
pays à pouvoir aller
in
sur
the
l'essentiel
country
et sur des choses
so
réelles.
that
Voilà
we
rapidement ce
can
que je peux dire
achieve tangible results. So
sur le
this is what
contexte. Et donc ici,
I
vous
can say
avez
about the
les pays
background.
qui
So
participent
here
à l'évaluation
you've got
PASEC
the
depuis l'année 2014, mise en
participating
place de
countries
l'évaluation régionale comparative.
ever
Et donc vous
since
allez voir qu'en
2014.
2024,
In
nous avons 21
2024,
pays.
there
Il
are
s'agit des
21
14 pays
countries.
du cycle
So the
précédent, plus 7
14
nouveaux pays. 7 nouveaux pays qui
countries
sont
from
ajoutés.
2019
Et
and
donc,
7 new
les pays
countries.
sont répartis dans 3 aires géographiques
So
différents.
you have
Il
three
s'agit des pays
geographical
francophones, des pays
regions. You have
anglophones et des pays
English
lusophones.
speaking,
Je vais revenir
French speaking, and
un peu plus
Portuguese
tard.
speaking countries
Et
from
donc,
Africa.
actuellement, quelle est la nouveauté du passé
So
par rapport à ce que la plupart des
what
gens
is
connaissent déjà?
new in
D'abord, il
PASIC?
faut dire qu'il y a 7 nouveaux
So
pays.
first of
Donc,
all, there are 7
de
more
cycle en
countries
cycle,
than
le nombre de
the
pays
previous
augmente.
cycle.
Ça, c'est une première dimension qu'il faut prendre en compte.
So
Et
the
donc,
number
le
of
PASEC a
countries
obligé
have
de
gone up.
s'ajuster aussi
And so
à cette
PASIC also
dynamique-là.
has to
Il y a
change
l'ajout
accordingly. And there's also the
d'un nouveau
addition
grade.
of two
C'est-à-dire, avant,
of
le
a
passé
new
collectait les
grade.
données au grade
Previously,
2, qu'on appelle comme la deuxième année, au grade 6, qu'on appelle fin de scolarité primaire. Mais
we
maintenant,
only had
l'évaluation
grade
intègre
6.
le
Now,
collège. Parce que vous savez très bien
the
que la transition école-collège, c'est une question
grade 9,
essentielle qui
10
se
has also
pose à
been
beaucoup
included,
du système
which
éducatif.
is
Et
the
par exemple, le programme
lower
Apprendre
secondary.
traverse cette dimension-là importante pour voir comment la transition école-collège est gérée
So
dans
this
les
is
pays.
really
Parce que
important
quand vous
because
regardez
we're
un peu
trying to
les
see how
statistiques
the
à la
transition
fin du
from
cycle primaire où on a des taux de réussite de 95,
the
90%, voire 100% dans
lower
d'autres pays,
secondary is
et qu'on
taking
passe au
place.
collège et par exemple,
Low,
au brevet, on a des taux de réussite de 30%, de
and
20%.
sometimes we
C'est
have
vraiment
a
problématique pour le
success
système
rate of
éducatif.
30% or
Comment on peut
20%, which
avoir
is
une
really
masse d'enfants,
problematic.
100% qui vont au collège, et il n'y a que 30% qui
And
passent
we
le cycle
see that
de
only
BPC c'est
sometimes
important parce que
30%
c'est
of the
beaucoup d'argent
students
qui sont injectés dans le système
graduate,
éducatif. Il
and
est important
there's a
d'analyser
lot
ce
of
système-là. Donc, les
problems,
ministres ont
there's a lot of
demandé
failure.
qu'on puisse
So
aller aussi au
the
collège pour voir un peu ce qui se passe. Donc,
ministers
les
want
résultats de
to know what
2024
is
vont
happening
permettre
in
aux différents états
the
gouvernements de voir
lower
entre
in
le
middle
primaire et le
schools,
collège qu'est-ce qui se passe. Donc, le comité
and
international aussi
why is the transition
va voir un
rate
peu comment
from
se
middle
passent les
schools to
résultats.
the lower
Ensuite,
secondary so
c'est
low.
une refonte de notre idéologie, de notre approche de collecte de données. D'abord, en deuxième
So
année, avant,
in the
c'était un
second,
livret
in grade
qui est
2,
soumis à l'enfant, c'est une passation individuelle entre l'administrateur
we had the
et
tablet
l'enfant.
collection of data from
Mais
grade 2
maintenant, c'est une
students.
collecte de données via des tablettes. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, à l'heure du numérique,
Previously, it
on
was
ne peut pas rester
paper.
à mal de
Now
cela. Donc,
it's
étant donné que la collecte
tablets.
de données se fait en passation individuelle
So
entre
data
l'enfant et
collection is
l'enquêteur,
done
les
individually
tablettes ont été
between a
introduites dans la collecte de
student
données pour aller plus vite,
and
avoir les données plus
a
rapidement.
surveyor.
Mais en fin de cycle primaire et au collège, nous avons maintenu des livrets papier parce que vous savez
We
très bien
also have
qu'en Afrique
paper
subsaharienne, le numérique n'est pas très développé dans les écoles et
in
on a des contextes parfois difficiles. Introduire la collecte de
as
données
well,
par
along
tablette,
with the
ça peut introduire des
tablets,
biais. Ce ne
because
sera plus les compétences de
digital
l'enfant que nous allons
technology
mesurer,
is
mais autre
not
chose.
very
Donc, on
widely
maintient
spread in
la collecte via
sub-Saharan
papier
Africa.
au niveau de ce degré-là.
So there
Ensuite,
is
nous avons introduit l'enquête
tablet
auprès des
data.
parents
We
d'élèves parce que vous
also
savez très
have
bien
a
que
parent survey of all
tout part de
students
là
tested.
dans beaucoup de contextes. L'environnement familial joue
The
sur.
family
D'abord,
environment
Stéphanie a parlé
plays
tout
an
à l'heure
extremely important
de questions
role
de
in
psychologie
education.
de l'enfant, etc. Il y a beaucoup de contextes familiales qui sont difficiles pour
The
certains enfants avant qu'ils
sometimes
ne viennent à l'école. Donc, il est important
students
d'analyser un
have a
peu
very
l'environnement familial.
difficult family
Donc,
context,
nous
so
avons
it's
des
important to
questionnaires
analyze the
maintenant qui sont
environment.
envoyés dans les ménages pour avoir
So
des
we have
informations et qui
surveyors
sont
sent to
retournées via l'enfant
homes,
qui est testé. Voilà.
and
Ensuite, c'est une enquête inclusive au handicap. Pour la première fois, nous avons
carry
eu un
out a survey
partenariat
with the
avec
parents. We
l'ONG
also have a
Savers et
disability
voilà, pour
inclusive
regarder
survey
tous les
to
items du
look
PASSEC
at
pour s'assurer qu'ils sont
to make
vraiment
sure that
contextualisés par rapport
PASSEC
aux enfants
is
situation de handicap dans un
completely
contexte et
inclusive
aussi pour voir un
and
peu comment
disabled children
adapter
are
notre méthodologie
also
à un enfant qui est en face d'un
factored in,
administrateur qui a
and
des handicaps, comment
also how
réorienter un
to
peu rapidement la
adapt
méthodologie pour
to
l'enquêter.
the
Avant, c'était pas,
needs of a
c'était
disabled
pas comme
child.
ça parce que le PASSEC excluait, par exemple,
Previously,
les enfants souffrant de
this
situation de
was
handicap,
not
mais
the
maintenant, il n'y a
case.
plus d'exclusion. On prend en compte tous ces
There is
enfants-là. Donc,
absolutely no
notre méthodologie a
exclusion
été
of
revue
disabled
pour prendre en
students
compte toute
like
cette
in
dimension-là
the
et voilà, et
past.
voir un peu comment former les administrateurs pour qu'en cas de ces cas d'enfants dans les classes, comment réagir. Je vais revenir dessus lorsqu'on va vers la fin. Voilà. Et aussi, c'est
Administrators are
l'inclusion
trained
de
to
beaucoup de
deal
dimensions
with
parce que je dirais
disabled
le
students.
D4, il y
And
a
there's also
beaucoup de
inclusion of specific
dimensions qui vont prendre en
dimensions
compte
in
dans
the
la analyse
questionnaires
et le
that are
système
designed
éducatif.
for
Donc, la citoyenneté mondiale,
PASEC,
la crise sécuritaire, la
like
crise
global
sanitaire,
citizenship,
voilà, le goût
security
à
crisis,
l'apprentissage,
health
le goût à l'école, le goût
crisis,
pour apprendre. Voilà, un enfant qui va
willingness
à
to
l'école, est-ce qu'il a vraiment
learn,
le goût, est-ce qu'il est
well-being at
intéressé à vraiment
school,
apprendre. Donc, tous ces
and
éléments-là, nous
all
essayons de les
these
analyser à travers
factors
nos
basically
questionnaires.
are included
Voilà.
in the
Donc, le
questionnaires.
contenu de l'évaluation PASSEC, vraiment, c'est une collecte de données sur ces 4 cibles que j'affiche ici. C'est grade 2, grade 5, 6, grade 9, 10 et les enseignants. Voilà.
So
Donc,
the content of
seulement
PASEC
un
is
questionnaire qui est adressé aux
concerns
enseignants
grade
pour
2,
pouvoir voir un
5,
peu
6, 9, and
leur
10.
environnement d'apprentissage, comment
There
ça se
is
passe
a
dans la
learning
classe. Mais
environment. The
c'est
idea is
un
to understand
exercice
how
concret
learning
ou
takes
test.
place in the classroom
Donc,
and also
l'enseignant
to take
aussi
a test.
passe
The
un test
teachers also
en
have to
compréhension de
take a
l'écrit et en
test
mathématiques,
in
plus
mathematics
bon
and
nombre de
writing
questionnaires
and reading,
contextuels pour
plus
analyser un peu
also
comment se passe
contextual questionnaires.
l'apprentissage. Et donc,
Uh,
en dehors des élèves, les
And
enseignants aussi sont soumis
in
à des
addition to the
épreuves qui
students, the
comportent
teachers also
4
have to
grandes
take a
dimensions,
test
notamment le
in
test en lecture par
4
rapport au contenu
fields,
donné, notamment le
reading
contenu
test
qui est enseigné par
regarding the
l'enseignant et
content
la
taught
didactique
by the
de ce
teacher
contenu-là.
and the
Ensuite, les
didactics of the
mathématiques et la
content, then
didactique mathématique.
mathematics,
Donc,
the
c'est vraiment
didactics of mathematics,
4 grandes dimensions qui sont analysées.
and
Et
the
le
4
sample du
dimensions which are
PASSEC
being
a aussi
analyzed,
évolué
and the
à cause
PASEC
des besoins
sample
des pays
has
du
also
PASSEC, à cause des
evolved
pays ont
because
besoin
of the
d'analyser
needs
des
of the
éléments de données.
countries,
Donc, non
because the
seulement
countries need
par
to
genre, par type
analyze
d'école, etc.,
data
mais
not
aussi
only per
à
type of
travers les
school,
différents
but
régimes,
also
départements du
through
pays. Donc,
different
pour avoir fait
departments,
ces
different
examens,
countries.
il faut avoir une échantillon quand
And
même
to carry
un peu
out this
plus
type
élevé.
of
Donc,
analysis,
nous sommes
you need
passés
to
à
have a
200 écoles
bigger sample.
primaires,
So now we
secondaires,
are
collèges.
dealing with 20
Donc,
primary
quelles sont les
schools
statistiques? À peu près 2400
and
enfants,
180
étudiants
secondary
primaires,
schools
plus
with
de 600 élèves. C'est vraiment des
2,400
statistiques
primary
ici.
school
Et
teachers by
plus de 10 000
for
parents d'élèves qui sont inscrits.
5,600 grades
Donc, à
in
l'échelle des
grades
21 pays, par
grade
exemple,
5 and
imaginons
6
plus de
pupils.
600 000 répondants
We have more than
base de données PASSEC.
600,000
Voilà,
respondents in the PASSEC database,
plus de 300 000 parents d'élèves qui seront
and more than
voilà,
300,000
donc,
parents
dans ces
who
écarts,
will
c'est nous
undergo
l'évaluation
this
vraiment
survey.
ouvrière
It's
qui va permettre
really
de
an
vraiment des informations très
assessment
importantes
which
dans
allows
les
us to
écoles.
collect a lot
Et
of
les résultats
information,
sont
more than
indicatifs
ever
et
in
vraiment
the
les résultats
education
vraiment seront
system,
vraiment
and the
une
results
occasion à la communauté internationale de pouvoir les prendre et les
will
analyser en profondeur
will be
pour voir,
used
voir comment
thoroughly
aider les
to
pays à
see
orienter
how
leur
we can
politique
help
éducative. Voilà.
countries
Donc,
direct
au travers de
and
l'enquête,
guide their
c'est sur la base
education
de deux
policy.
instruments.
So
Donc,
these
je pense que
the
développe
survey is carried
beaucoup
out
plus
on
d'instruments par
with
pays.
a
Nous avons
certain number
actuellement
of
17
tools and
instruments qui sont développés
instruments.
par pays.
We have more
Et
than
vous pouvez
17
regarder
developed for
ici,
each
vous avez des
country.
instruments au niveau
You
du
have them
grade 2,
here. You
grade
have them for
6, au niveau
grade
du
2,
grade
grade
10
6,
et au
grade
niveau
9, and grade
des
10.
cahiers d'identification
And
qui sont préparés pour les enquêteurs qui
these
vont aller dans les
instruments are
classes,
prepared
qui sont
for the
préparés.
surveyors who
Nous
will be
avons
going and the
des
assessors
questionnaires
who
qui
will
sont
go in the
adressés aux chefs
classrooms. We
d'établissement,
have
aux directeurs. Voilà
questionnaires
comment les
for
aider
the
dans
head of
l'environnement
the school
d'apprentissage parce que, comme le disait Stéphanie tout à l'heure,
regarding the environment and
l'environnement
the learning
d'apprentissage,
environment,
c'est
because
un
as we
élément
said, the learning
important.
environment
Et
is an
PASSEC ne
important
fait pas seulement
element.
des tests aux
PASEC
élèves
does
parce
not
qu'il est
only
trivial
ask
de dire
students to
que
take
quand
tests,
on fait les tests aux
but
enfants, il faut toujours voir dans
when
quelles
students
conditions
take
l'enfant
tests,
apprend
you have to
et
see in what
d'où l'enfant
conditions
vient, voilà,
children learn, where they come
il
from,
apprend. Et donc,
and
nous
how they
avons,
learn.
nous avons tous ces instruments
So we
co-conçus avec le
have
ministère et le gouvernement et
co-designed that
nous
with
avons
the governments,
plusieurs langues
and we
d'enseignement qui sont
have different
concernées. Donc,
teaching
on peut s'imaginer que ce
languages
n'est seulement
and
en français,
instruction
non,
languages.
parce que
The
l'évaluation
instruction is not
soit
only in
faite en
French, the
anglais,
assessment
en
is done in
portugais,
French, in
en
English, in
arabe,
Portuguese, in
plus les
Arabic,
langues nationales,
as well
plus
as the
d'une dizaine de
national
langues nationales.
languages of some 10
Voilà. Donc,
national
au Sénégal, par exemple,
languages.
vous avez plus de
So in Senegal,
environ
for
4 langues
instance, you
nationales qui
have
sont
about 4
concernées
national languages,
et dans
and
d'autres pays. Et les
the
questionnaires
same goes to in other
contextuels viennent
countries. And
vraiment
the
comme un
contextual
refond questionnaire
questionnaire
que nous avons
is
fait
really
pour
a
inclure
complete
d'autres
reshuffling
conditions contextuelles qui
to
seront
include
pour prendre en compte dans
certain
les tests
contextual
nationaux.
elements which are
Il y a eu la
important
méthodisation
and help us take into
significative
account the
des
context
tests
of the
aux
different
élèves, aux
countries. And
enseignants
there is
et
this
aux
means
voilà,
a major
merci beaucoup
improvement of the test for the students
aux
and the
enseignants. Et c'est
teachers.
une refonte
And
des
we have
méthodes
also
de méthodologie pour pouvoir
reshuffled the
tester les élèves.
methodology
Voilà.
so
Donc,
as to be able to test the
rapidement,
students. So very
pour
quickly,
ceux qui sont connectés,
for
pour
those of you who
découvrir
are
le contenu du test
connected,
PASSEC, par exemple, en grade 2, en grade 6 et en grade
this
9,
is the content
c'est
of
en
the
lecture et
PASEC test
mathématiques.
in
Et
grade
quand on
2,
parle de lecture
5, 6,
mathématiques,
and
c'est
9
bien sûr
in
les
reading and
différents domaines,
mathematics. And reading, of course, means the
qui sont
different
concernés
fields
au
of
niveau
reading,
des
i.e.,
contrôles et puis des
comprehension
sur la
and
base de ce
the
qui est attendu au niveau
decoding.
international. Donc, vous avez,
And
par exemple,
based on
en
what is
grade 9,
expected at the
la
international
compréhension
level in
expressive,
grade
l'inférence,
9, you
l'expression,
have
etc.
explicit
Voilà.
comprehension, simple
Et en
inference,
mathématiques, par
etc.
exemple, au niveau
In
pour les
mathematics,
gestions de collège, vous avez non
for
seulement
lower
des items
secondary
qu'on appelle relevé
students,
facile,
you know, not
par
only
exemple,
have
autant des items
items
des
for
enfants qui sont
easy
au primaire,
subject matters,
facile
but you have
primaire,
also
quelques items au niveau
certain
pour voir
things,
que
some items
est-ce
for
qu'un enfant
primary to
qui est en train
school
de finir
children,
faire le
and
BPC
some more
peut
difficult, just to
résoudre
see
un
when the
problème
children who have
voilà,
completed the lower
primaire. Et
secondary
ça, voilà,
school
c'est
can
vraiment quelque chose qui
solve
prend en
a
compte
problem meant for
dans
primary
l'apprentissage
education students. So this is
nos
what we
tests.
have in
Voilà.
our
Donc,
tests.
comme je le disais, les
So as I
questionnaires, comme je disais, les
said,
questionnaires
the
très
questionnaires
riches, très
are
fournis.
really
Vous avez
very
ici, voilà, toutes
rich
les informations que nous prenons comme des
questionnaires with
questionnaires.
a lot
Vous
of
avez
things
les
in the
ressources
questions. Here you have
éducatives
all the
administratives en
dimensions,
classe
the
scolaire.
education
Vous avez les
resources at
caractéristiques
home,
des
the
entreprises.
characteristics of
Vous avez les
those
conditions
being
d'apprentissage.
surveyed. You have the
Voilà. Vous
learning
avez
conditions.
la
You
question de la
have
notation scolaire. Vous avez la question de
the
la sécurité. Vous
schools,
avez la question des relations
safety
entre
at
les parents
school, the
d'élèves. Vous avez la
relations
question de
with
la liée
parents,
avec les
the
communautés. Vous avez la
community,
question de
relations with
l'éducation
the
inclusive.
community,
Voilà.
the
Et vous avez
inclusive
maintenant
education
toute la
issue,
batterie
and you have a whole set of
du contexte de l'école, les infrastructures,
context,
les
school,
équipements, le
infrastructure,
fonctionnement de l'école,
equipment,
etc. Voilà,
operation of the
toutes les
school.
questions pédagogiques, de
So
lien
all the
entre le directeur
pedagogical
et les
aspects
enseignants,
and the
élèves, les
links
questions de
between the
harcèlement,
headmaster
etc.,
and
questions de
the
violence
teachers,
scolaire. Donc,
the
toutes ces
violence,
dimensions qui sont vraiment
harassments,
prises
and
en
all
compte
these
dans les
dimensions
questionnaires. Ces
are
questionnaires-là,
present in the
c'est des choses que
questionnaire.
nous
And
finalisons
these are
en
things
posant
we
les questions à nos
finalize
partenaires
by
en
asking
début
questions
du cycle
to our
d'évaluation,
partners at
en
the
posant les
beginning
questions
of
aussi aux
the
pays
assessment cycle and asking
de nos
questions to the countries.
voilà, de nos regroupements, de nos activités. Voilà.
And
Donc,
just
ici, aujourd'hui,
to keep a
on
breath
parle
of
de
the
santé et
activities.
bien-être.
We talk
Et
today about
effectivement,
health
ces
and
deux notions
well-being.
mesurées par le
These are
PASSEC.
two concepts measured by
Parce
PASEC
qu'en dehors des tests,
because
comme je le
apart from
disais,
the
les
test,
questionnaires
as I
prennent en compte
said,
plusieurs
the questionnaires
aspects
take
de
into into account different aspects regarding the pupils. You have the conditions for learning, safety at school, disability, interest in certain matters, subject matters, and what do we measure through health and well-being? For students, you have all the questions, the issues related to the visual problems, because you know that students have to read the blackboard. So you have some students who cannot read what is on the blackboard, but the teacher doesn't know. And you have students who may be sick without knowing that. The parents do not know that, because sometimes the child says, I don't feel well. The parents they don't take that into account, etc. So you have also the hearing difficulties. Some children do not hear well, and then some children take their notes to the home, and they've not written the notes properly. And we also have the school meals, because not only it's important to know whether the child eats well at home, but also in school. How many meals does the child have? You have also questions put to the parents in a questionnaire. You have all the questions regarding activities outside the school. For instance, sometimes the child has to sell things in the morning before going to school, and you also have to know where the child has to go, in what schools before going home, doing his homework. So these are all questions you find in the questionnaire. You have also the fear, the students afraid of school, of the class, or home, or are there safety issues? And we have all these dimensions. We have also the pupil-teacher relationship and how the child feels with the teacher. And is he afraid of the teacher? Oh, these are all elements taken into account. You have the interest for the school. Is the child willing to learn? You also have the issue of violence at school. There are two levels. The question is put to the child, to the teacher, and to the school head, just to compare all the answers. Because this allows you to compare these answers. And at the level of the school, you have, and the teachers, you have the moral and sexual harassment. Is the teacher respected by the students? Does the teacher have respect for students? What are the working conditions for the teacher, the salaries? In many countries, you also have all the questions related to the environment, the teaching environment, because sometimes the teacher is lost in the classroom. There are so many students that he cannot see how many he has. And you have the management of the school and the classroom. How does the teacher see that? What are the promotion opportunities, the learning opportunities, or the training opportunities for the teachers? What are the relations with the parents, the career prospects, etc.? What are the conditions? Is the classroom fit for learning, for proper learning? Does the teacher, is the teacher able to detect children with disabilities who do not learn properly? And if there are disabilities, does the teacher adapt the teaching methods? These are all the questions that are put to the teachers. Now, for the school head, you have questions regarding the environment of the school, violence against pupils, violence against teachers, violence against the staff, and also the working conditions. And is the school properly dimensioned? What about the sanitation aspects in the school? What about safety in the school? Is there any lack of safety or security in the school? And how do they manage that with the local authorities in the country? How is the sanitation aspect managed? Is the school supported by the authorities in case of a sanitary crisis? These are, for instance, questions we put to the students regarding health. We ask them, do you have difficulties seeing when you want to read something on the blackboard? Any difficulties to hear? And can you hear when the teacher speaks or reads something? How many meals do you eat a day? Where does the water use at home come from? And because for some students, it might be difficult. So for the well-being, we also have questions such as, are you or do you feel scared? Are you afraid on the way to the school, or when you're at school, the teacher help you in the classroom? Are you interested in being in the classroom? Do you like the school? These elements are questions we put to the students regarding their well-being. For the teachers, you have questions like the ones I mentioned. For instance, how among your students this year do you have disabilities or learning difficulties you have noted? Because you have a lot of teachers who have children with disabilities and they don't know about it. Do you have toilets in the school? Is it for boys and girls? Are they for boys and girls? Are they clean? And the PASEC protocol leads the people who carry out the survey to check whether the toilets are clean. You don't only take into account what the headmaster says. You just have to check whether the toilets are clean, well cleaned. How do you rate your working conditions? And is there any violence and harassment in the school? Have the teachers been interrupted because of a security crisis? Has your school been occupied by armed forces? These are all questions which are put to the teachers in the schools. And for the first time, we will be able to trace displaced children or refugee children in the country, which will allow us to deal with the refugee issue and how we deal with these children compared to the other children. So that was very quickly what I can say regarding regarding PASEC, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Hilaire.
Thank you very much, Hilaire, for your presentation, this extremely rich presentation on PASEC. We have questions online, but what I will do is first give the floor to Ali, and this way I will be able to open the discussion on how we measure the different data collected and the different questions online.
Switch into English for the second part of this webinar. In fact, the second presentation of this webinar. So now let's travel to Southeast Asia. And then to discover and to learn more about another very important regional study, large-scale study in Asia. So I will give the floor to Alejandro Ibanez, also named Ali, who is the program manager and policy specialist at the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Matrix, also named CPLM. And this is a very innovative regional program launched in 2012, if I don't make any mistake, by the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, CIMEO, and UNICEF. And the main objective is to assess and enhance primary education quality across Southeast Asia. So Ali leads CPLM, the first and the second regional large-scale learning assessment and capacity building program. So that is designed to monitor and improve student learning outcomes. So Ali has quite a lot of extensive experience in the design of large-scale assessments, test development, policy dialogue with a particular emphasis on cross-border knowledge sharing, peer learning, and fostering collaboration to support data-driven education reform in Southeast Asia. And Ali will be presenting CPLM and as well this dimension of health and well-being at primary in Southeast Asia. So I will be sharing the screen in French and Ali will be speaking in English. Ali?
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Just checking if you can actually see my screen right now.
Colleagues, if you can.
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
in French.
All right. Thank you very much once again, Stephanie and colleagues from IAEP for this invitation. It's my pleasure to actually be joining this discussion and presenting to you some of our experience from Southeast Asia, drawing some of our experiences from the Southeast Asia primary learning metrics. which what we call CPLM. But I'll be specifically focusing on well-being and learning and how these two concepts are actually very much intertwined and interconnected. So just to start off my presentation, I just would like to give a very quick introduction of what CPLM is. As mentioned already by Stephanie, we are the first regional large-scale student learning assessment in Southeast Asia. Similar with PASSEC, we're part of the broader international large-scale assessment community in charge to track and monitor student learning outcomes against the global goals, such as the SDG 4.1.1 indicator. And in particular, CPLM is internationally recognized to report on SDG 4.1.1b, which looks at the minimum proficiency of boys and girls at the end of primary education for both literacy and numeracy. Aside from being a large-scale learning assessment, we're also a capacity building program. That means in the delivery and design of our program activities, we ensure that all the countries participating in the program are actually engaged into increasing their technical and also institutional capacity on the use of evidence so that we can ensure and advance evidence-based driven reforms and data-driven reforms and policy actions in basic education system. So as I've mentioned, CPLM is part of a broader international large-scale assessment community. So in terms of our methodological design, standards, and practice, we very much draw from all of these international experience. Our assessments are administered every 5 years, and the first cycle happened in 2019, and now we just did our main survey in 2024, and this year we are now in a strong position to report and look at the data and see whether there is growth over time and understand trend analysis as well in order to compare pre and post pandemic context. So similar with PASSEC as well, we adopt the international practice of large-scale assessments where we engage all the countries in test development, item writing, item review, linguistic language translation and adaptation, and many other technical areas to develop regional instruments for the assessment. We're also a regional assessment. That means the ownership and solidarity is very much embedded in the program design. Our first experience happened in 2019, so much more of our experience draws from that particular cycle. But in 2024, we also made substantive changes in our technical design, in particular highlighting the impact of pandemic and understanding that the education system landscape in Southeast Asia has drastically changed because of the pandemic. And so many of the policy response of the governments in the region primarily focused on learning recovery. And so the 2024 cycle highlights this growth over time or this context around post-pandemic setting. All of these leads up to our third cycle, hopefully to happen in 2029, which is the last year to report before the SDG 2030 targets. So CPLM focuses on the assessment of primary education. That means skills acquired all throughout the basic education stage. And so the target of the assessment is on grade 5 students, primarily looking at literacies in various forms of reading, writing, and mathematics. For CPLM, we have explicitly made our assessment framework to be adaptive, but also assesses higher order thinking skills. That means our literacy is not much concerned about content and knowledge, but rather looking at students' capacity in translating these skills into what we call everyday literacy, solving everyday problems, real life situations, adapting and applying skills on reading, math, and writing into solving real world problems in their respective communities and the broader ASEAN community. So aside from the cognitive tests that we administer for grade 5 students and for all the countries, we've also administered contextual questionnaires. And these questionnaires are intended to assess the association between children's characteristics and the environment, and of course, connected to the broader learning performance. We have administered our contextual questionnaires into four multiple fronts. We have the student questionnaire, parent questionnaire, school questionnaire, and teacher questionnaire as well. All of these variables shows some sort of parallelism where each of the items are linked into some of the items connected into other questionnaires. When relevant, variables are merged to compute new indices and variables in order to capture a holistic picture of learning process. And if you look at the range of these questionnaires, we're looking at more or less more than 400 variables to address children's experience, the school environment, attitudes, and values. One unique aspect of CPLM, I guess, is that in the 2019 cycle in particular, many of the countries decided to focus on global citizenship. That's why in our questionnaires embedded in each of these four questionnaires, we were able to make explicit a particular module on global citizenship and looks at how students' behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs affect the learning process. Of course, we're not saying that this serves as a substitute for causal interference as determining what works in context to improve learning, but rather these contextual investigations help us set directions and priorities in order to advance respective national goals in education, but more broadly advances the regional goals in the ASEAN community. So what I'll be focusing in my presentation would be some of the outcomes that we have produced embedded in our regional reports. Of course, drawing in some insights from our main regional report from the 2019 cycle that was launched in 2020, and also drawing some insights from our policy briefs that were launched in 2022. And these series of regional thematic studies take stock on the 2019 evidence highlighting learning and contextual disparities between many angles, such as disparities between boys and girls. The profile of low-performing readers in Southeast Asia also looks at the support to teachers and the working conditions. And just recently, I think in 2023, in 2024, we have launched our latest thematic report on children well-being and its connection to academic learning. So this diagram showcases our questionnaire framework that aims to be able to capture the holistic context in Southeast Asia. So when, of course, understanding student outcomes, it is important to also investigate the context on the range of factors that may explain the variation into student learning. We also understand that student learning occurs through a variety of activities and experiences at different levels. And these levels sometimes intersect and sometimes overlap in many circumstances. And in the CPLM contextual questionnaire, we're able to identify or to classify factors into what we call antecedents and processes. Antecedents, these are factors that may or refer to the conditions in which learning takes place. They are typically referring to contextual factors that are not directly influenced by the learning process, but of course, we do recognize its role in influencing and impacting learning in various levels. We also identified the processes, and these refer to factors that directly influence learning. They are constrained by the antecedent factors and factors found at higher levels. These categories would refer to opportunities for learning, for example, during class, teachers' attitude towards study, and the direct student learning environment in the classroom and also at home. So both of these categories are of course taken into account in order to explain the variation that we are seeing in the learning outcome process. And as you can see, whereas antecedent factors shape and constrain the process of learning and hence their outcomes at each level, process factors, on the other hand, can be influenced by the level of existing learning outcomes. So what you see in your diagram right now, the double arrow, refers to or emphasizes the possibility of feedback between the learning process and the learning outcome. So, for example, the learning process within the classroom could be positively influenced by the level of already acquired knowledge about the subject of its students. While the single-headed arrow that you see in your diagram and your screen right now, in turn, indicates the assumption within the CPLM contextual framework of a unidirectional association at each contextual level. So how do we now further understand the variables included in our contextual questionnaires? Well, first and foremost, we need to also understand that the 2019 contextual questionnaires at the country level do not cover all issues highlighted in the literature and global framework because we are limited with testing constraints and also the limitation of developing items that are comparable and also relevant to the context of many education systems in Southeast Asia. While some of them are covered, of course, the important ones are covered in the sections of the background questionnaires, such as attitudes towards schools, home and family, and many other important constructs. Factors, for example, such as bullying and violence are also measured, but it's only measured at the school level. And so limiting down the breakdown of results by direct and indirect exposure to these factors. Of course, we're also limited by the database. So the database constraints is very much apparent to generate some analysis. And so what we did is to be able to identify variables that show potential in linking to academic learning. So many of the questions related to well-being and learning are scattered across all the questionnaires. And these refer to more than 20 questions that aims to address attitudes and values. And also, with also important that these are not cognitive measurements, but these are non-cognitive measurements of well-being impact to learning. And similar to other assessments, our modality of administration is still paper and pencil test, including the questionnaires, and many of the item formats adopts the Likert style format and a dichotomous response of yes or no format. So what I'll be presenting to you very quickly are some of the findings from our latest thematic report looking at the connection of well-being and learning. And this looks at the regional angle, of course, does not necessarily reflect the country level nuances. This particular report provides a deeper understanding of the children's attitudes and values in some well-being domains. And so what we have found out would be some interesting insights that help shape and advance countries' response into improving school environment and making sure that schools are safe for children and learners. So what I'm showing you right now is a conceptual framework that we have adopted in the study. And this very much mirrors the conceptualization of children's well-being in UNICEF Innocenti's report card launched in 2020. So this analysis in particular considers child well-being as influenced by objective and subjective factors, including their own actions, experiences, and relationships. So this report that I'll be presenting includes or recognizes the well-being and learning effects and understanding that these effects are intentionally bidirectional and influenced by multiple factors, including social and environmental context. And of course, we would want to also give the caveat that we're focusing primarily on the relationship between well-being and learning. And we have categorized this analysis into three main areas. One would be on mental well-being, physical well-being, and social and environmental context. So just to give you a quick introduction on the methodology, we are using data from the 2019 assessment, getting responses from grade 5 students in 6 Southeast Asian countries. And these data sets are deemed to be nationally representative. That means it aims to make assumptions around large-scale contexts, but also incorporates children's or learners' own perspectives through our tools on the student questionnaire. Some caveats to understand in the findings. There's no objective measure, such as life is satisfaction, happiness, or whatever objective indicator. But rather, we're looking at some behavioral manifestations, attitudinal items, and also perspectives of learners. And for it to also to give you a caveat that the exposure to violence, for example, is only measured at the school level, reported by school leaders and principals. Again, limiting the breakdown of results by direct and indirect exposure to these factors. And many of these items are self-reported, so there's a potential or tendency for bias when disclosing the incidence of different forms of violence and different levels. All right, so let's start with mental well-being area, and we understand that mental well-being encompasses a broader sense of positive functioning. And we also understand based on literature that good quality relationships, such as supportive family, peers, and communities, are actually very important in order to influence and improve academic learning. And so for this particular component, we're looking at household environment that are favorable to learning, and also social environment at school that makes learning more enjoyable and more meaningful for learners. So what did we find out? Studies show that good quality relationship between parents and children boost the self-esteem and increase children's motivation and engagement in school. In the 2019 data in particular, we saw that parental engagement in children's learning differed by country. You see, for example, Vietnam reporting the highest percentages in almost all forms of engagements compared to other countries. The data also shows that parental engagement is dependent on socioeconomic status. That means those children, for example, from low economic status reported low levels of parental engagement compared to those children belonging to higher socioeconomic status. We also saw that parental motivation in learning is very much important. You see that children whose parents daily motivated them to succeed in school were significantly more likely to achieve higher scores than those who rarely or do not motivate or those students who were not motivated at all by their parents. So this association between parental engagement and learning appears to create the largest gap, learning gap across the socioeconomic spectrum. And so this now cements the idea that for learning to succeed, learners need to be an environment with a supportive family. That means parents very much involved and very much engaged in giving motivation to learning to learners to do well in their respective classrooms. To also highlight one of some of the policy response of our countries, there's a multi-country initiative called Parenting for Lifelong Health, which now aims to strengthen caregivers' ability to ensure the health and well-being of their child through positive parenting techniques. We also saw that in many countries, in response to this finding in 2021, many of the countries expanded their support to rural communities, in particular opening up ECE centers in order to boost support to early learners, but also opening space for parents to be very much involved into academic learning. Some countries even did or strengthened their teacher and parents association that would ensure that there's platform for parents to be in the classroom or in the school, but also orienting them in order to give to take part in their role in improving learning process at home. So looking at the social environment, we also saw that there's a strong positive relationship between children's perceived safety at school and their academic performance. On average, you see that among the countries, children who felt safe at school were more likely to obtain higher scores in all the three learning domains. At the country level, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Philippines saw the greatest differences in learning outcomes related to children's perceived safety at school in all three domains. Children who exhibited positive feelings and attitudes, for example, greater sense of belongingness, feeling like they are happy inside the school, and also when they see that many of the things being taught in the classroom are useful for them, then this actually shows a pattern where well, it greater improves learners' performance. In addition, data suggests that an association between learning and children's perceived usefulness of the knowledge is very much important. And the magnitude difference is so huge, as you can see, compared to other statements. And that difference is quantified to roughly around 30 scale points. across the learning domains. If we're going to look at the prevalence of violence in school, we understand that schools are important and schools serve as the second home of many of our learners. And we understand as well its role in shaping children's safety and children's learning success. Yet, in our 2019 data, we saw that there's a prevalence of existing of different forms of violence. For example, on average, 35% of children in among the 6 countries were enrolled in a school where bullying occurred at least once a month. Exposure to bullying varies considerably by locality and country, while 29% of children in rural schools were exposed to bullying in their schools more frequently than those children enrolled in urban schools. At the regional level, we saw that there's also huge variation, where Philippines is demonstrating 63% occurrence of bullying compared to Cambodia, who demonstrates only 2%. And this variation, of course, is significant because it shows how varied the contexts of each country is, but also it shows you the range of the prevalence of bullying, where in one country there's minimal occurrence, but in many countries it's actually very much apparent. And the result for the Philippines, for example, is 3 times the world average. World average is roughly around 20 to 25%, but in the Philippines, 63%. So six out of 10 children are experiencing bullying at least once a month. And this only covers incidents reported officially or reported by the school. That means undocumented incidents are not part of the statistics. So we now understand that many of the undocumented statistics would show you a much greater prevalence. We also saw that children's activities are critical factors to affecting learning. So for the analysis here, we focused on children's time use and activities, including household chores and responsibilities, and also looking at the water, sanitation, and hygiene and nutrition. So what did we see? On average, nearly 7 out of 10 children participated daily in household chores and caregiving activities in their own homes, regardless of their locality, whether they are urban or rural area. Girls are more often for caring for younger siblings and older relatives than boys. Across genders and across countries, we saw that those children who are actually involved in household responsibilities tend to show low performance than those children who do not have any household responsibilities. And in all countries, children who regularly engaged in all of these activities, like farm work, commercial work, physical work, etc., they performed worse in all 3 learning domains than children who rarely or never did such activities. We also know that, of course, the water, sanitation, and hygiene in schools is essential to children's physical well-being. And so in our 2019 data, we saw that 14% of children in the 6 countries did not have access to safe drinking water at schools, especially in rural areas. At the country level, the highest percentage of children without access to safe drinking water at school were reported to be in Lao PDR and Cambodia, which roughly around 40 to 42%. And if you compare that to Vietnam, where only 4% of children don't have any access to safe drinking water. And it's also logic tells us that if children attend schools that have access or adequate access to wash facilities, then of course they tend to perform better than those children who do not have access into these facilities at school. Now, finally, in our last domain, we looked at social and environmental context. So we're also assessing the worries of the children about the environment and their learning about the environment. So this section particularly engages the interrelatedness of children's well-being and learning. And we specifically looked at these 2 components of their belief and about the environment and learning about environment in school. So what the data tells us is that environmental issue is at the core of many of our children's worries, which is very apparent because, Southeast Asia is the ground zero of climate change. And so we understand that many of our children are very much concerned on environmental issues and environmental problems. Most of these concerns appear to be common to children among children regardless of their locality or regardless of their socioeconomic status. However, we know that girls and children from socioeconomic status from higher SES were significantly more likely to express concerns about the environment than those boys who belong to the low SES. We also saw that those children who have greater interest and concern on the environment tend to demonstrate greater performance and greater scores in all of the domains. And so this again cements the positive correlation between children's concern for environmental sustainability and their learning performance. So to end my presentation, just to give you a range of policy pointers that we have forwarded along with our partners and countries in the region, where we have subdivided two response categories. You have one at the national and systems level, and also at the school level. At the systems level, we are encouraging intersectoral collaboration to ensure that there is strong support for learners, not only on the academic side, but also, and more importantly, also on the non-academic side. Invest in basic school-based WASH services. We saw that although we're be talking about AI and the advancement of technology, we also understand that in parallel there are still structural challenges being experienced by many of the communities in the region. We also saw that for us to address foundational skills or foundational learning, we need to also invest heavily on resources that would support and would cultivate the culture of learning in school and also at home. And finally, of course, ensure the safety of many of our learners, and especially in a region where climate change and many school disruptions are happening due to climate is also very much apparent. At the school level, of course, there's encouragement for all the schools to be able to ensure that schools are treated as a safe space for many of our learners, and promoting physical activity and support to young learners by helping them increase their social emotional learning, for example, managing their own self-emotion and their behavior, managing risk, and reduce vulnerability. So that's it, and that's all from my end. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to respond and engage in some of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali, for this very interesting presentation. So we received quite a lot of questions. So I'm going to ask my colleague Laura Paviot, who is a co-coordinator of this course, and as well the responsible of the specialized courses, to share with us some of the questions. But maybe I will ask the first question. Maybe first to Hilaire, and then Ali, if you would like to answer, I'll let you take a little bit of breath after your excellent presentation. Donc peut-être une première question que je vais poser à Hilaire avant de donner la
So
parole
first
à
question
Laura
for Hilaire
pour
before I give the
les
floor
questions.
to Laura, who's
Sachant
gathered together some of the
que les
questions.
questions
So
liées
given
aux
that all of the questions linked
paramètres
to
de ces
the
enquêtes,
parameters
c'est
of
ainsi qu'il y a aussi
the
de deux enquêtes régionales
questionnaires,
internationales
the
sont
CPLM and then the
dans le cours que
regional
nous faisons à
inquiries are
l'IP. Nous
covered
allons pas pouvoir
by
répondre à toutes les questions.
the classes that we
Peut-être une
give. So
première
we won't be able
question
to
à
answer all of those
Hilaire
questions. But first of all, a question
par
for
rapport au
Hilaire
programme PASSEC.
on the PASEC program.
C'est un programme énorme,
It's a
énormément de
huge
pays,
program
beaucoup
covering a lot of
d'instruments
countries,
mesures,
a
trois
lot
niveaux,
of
trois
indicators,
années
3 levels, 3
d'élèves
years,
qui vont
3
participer
grades covered
à la dernière vague.
that
Et
took part in the last
je
wave.
me demandais, au vu du volume,
And given the volume
des instruments, mais aussi du
of your
nombre de pays,
instruments and the
est-ce
number
que
of
tous les
participating
instruments sont
countries,
communs à
are
tous les
all of
pays?
your instruments
Est-ce qu'il
shared
y
by
a
all
des
of the
modules
countries?
spécifiques
Are
aussi
there
pour certains
specific
pays en
modules for some
fonction
countries
du
depending
contexte? Alors, bien
on the
sûr, tout ce qui est
context?
lié à la santé et bien-être.
Anything to
Et je
do
me
with health
demandais,
and
est-ce
well-being,
que
obviously.
donc ces
But I
instruments,
was wondering if these
les questions liées à la
instruments
santé et bien-être sont les mêmes au travers de tous
are
les
the same
pays, de
for
tous les
all of the
niveaux,
countries
ou
at all
est-ce qu'il y a
levels?
eu des
Or
modules spécifiques pour
are there
certains
specificities
domaines, pour certains
for
pays?
some areas or for some countries?
Voilà, merci beaucoup pour la question,
Thank you very
Stéphanie.
much for your
Merci des
question,
différents
Stephanie.
différentes questions qui ont été posées dans le chat
And
là.
thank you as well for the various questions in the
précisément,
chat. So on this question
les questionnaires du
specifically,
PASEC sont des questions
the
qui
PASEC
seraient
questionnaires
contextualisées par pays.
are
C'est-à-dire, par
contextualized
exemple,
per country.
au niveau des, par exemple, du diplôme des enseignants,
For teacher
de certains aspects qui sont
diplomas,
vraiment contextuels, c'est
all
vraiment
of this is
contextualisé par pays.
contextualized
Mais globalement,
for
les
each
questions
country.
restent les mêmes
But on the
pour
whole,
tous les
it's the
pays.
same questions for all
Les questions de
countries.
sécurité, les questions de santé, etc.
Safety, for
C'est les
example, all
mêmes
of
questions qui sont
this.
posées
It's
à
the same
tous les
questions
pays, quel que soit le contexte.
asked of all
Même
countries
s'il y a
in
des
all
contextes où
contexts.
la
Even if there are
sécurité
some
est
contexts
plus,
where
est plus,
safety
voilà,
is
présent parlant, on va le noter dans les réponses,
is more difficult than
dans les
elsewhere,
questions
but we will it will be
voilà.
the
Donc, c'est
same
important de
questions.
savoir aussi
And it's also important to
des
know
environnements où on pense que
that there
tout
are
est bon,
contexts where we
alors que
think that
ailleurs, tout n'est pas
everything is
bon.
okay,
C'est
whereas
difficile
actually that's
d'enlever
not the
ces
case.
questions-là et de dire que oui, tout va bien, voilà, nous on est
But it's
expert
hard to take out those
dans ces
questions saying,
conditions.
okay, no,
Mais
everything's going
il
just
faut que
fine.
nous gardons ces questions-là, quels que soient les
So
contextes,
we keep the
et
questions,
c'est
whatever the
voilà,
context.
après les réponses aux questions qu'on analyse pour voir un peu, voilà, dans tel environnement, voilà,
So
la situation est beaucoup plus présente dans tel contexte,
in
voilà.
some contexts, obviously the
Est-ce que ça
situation is much more
répond
dire, but
à votre question?
I hope that answered your question.
Merci beaucoup, Hilaire.
Yes, it did. Thank you
Ça
very
qu'on
much,
voit,
Hilaire.
c'est
And this
vraiment
is where
énorme,
we
hein,
see
la
that it's
bibliothèque.
huge,
C'est en train
this
de
the amount
charger.
of data that you're gathering. And I guess it's
Je vais
underway right
donner
as we
la
speak.
parole à
I will
Laura,
now give the floor to
notre
Laura,
coordinatrice du cours,
who is the
sur le centre
co-coordinator for this course.
spécialisé.
She's in charge of the specialized course as well.
Merci Stéphanie.
Thank you,
Je vois
Stephanie.
plusieurs questions qui se regroupent
So,
entre elles.
so there's several groups of
Tout
questions here,
particulièrement, par exemple,
especially,
en ce qui concerne le
let's see,
PASEC.
everything to do with
Hilaire, il y
PASEC.
a une
So,
question
Hilaire, there's a
plus
question
d'un point de vue systémique.
from a
L'idée de
systemic
connaître
point
un
of
peu
view
mieux comment le
to better
résultat
know
du
how
PASEC
the results of
peuvent
the
être
PASEC
utilisés
questionnaire can be used
pour améliorer les politiques
to
éducatives
improve
et,
education
et
policy
aussi comprendre un peu mieux s'il y a
and
un
to better
mécanisme qui
understand if
permet
there
de
are any
vérifier le niveau de
mechanisms
prise
to
en
make it
compte des
possible
résultats
to
du
see whether
PASEC.
the results are actually taken into account, whether the
Oui,
results
merci
count,
Laura
matter.
vraiment
Yes, thank you very
cette
much
question. Et
for this
effectivement,
question.
le
Indeed,
PASEC, depuis quelques années, nous avons
for the
commencé
past
par
few years,
regarder un peu,
we
lorsque les
first
gens
of
ont
all
publié, quelles sont les
started to
réactions.
look at what people's
D'abord,
reactions
quelles sont les
were when we
réactions?
published the
D'abord,
data.
quand les résultats doivent être publiés, voilà,
So when they're
quelqu'un montre les
published,
résultats. Quand
people
les
see
résultats
the
sont publiés, on
results,
voit aussi l'engouement, voilà, autour
and
des,
you also
voilà,
see, well, there's a
des
lot of
classements,
enthusiasm.
chaque se classer entre pays.
Everybody
Voilà,
wants to see
ça,
what the
c'est important.
rankings
Mais
are.
pour la prise en compte des
But
résultats dans les
then
politiques,
to
c'est une dimension
actually
importante pour la compréhension.
translate into
Comment? Parce que quand on
policy,
publie les résultats, il ne s'agit pas
well,
seulement
when the results are
de mettre
published,
les rapports dans les tiroirs, mais c'est de voir
it's not just to
comment ça
put
a
the reports
impacté
on a shelf, but to see what the
l'orientation
impact
des
is.
politiques au niveau
And
national,
does it
mais
change
aussi
policy
les questions de
orientation at country level?
remédiation.
And then there's
Comment les
also the question
remédiations
of
ont été analysées,
remediation.
ont été prises en compte. Donc,
Were any corrective measures
depuis près
taken?
de 5 ans,
So
la COFME a commencé
over the
par
past 5 years,
accompagner les pays
we've
à
started
mettre en place ce qu'on
assisting
appelle des
countries
plans
to
d'action
implement
sur
action
l'exploitation et
plans
l'utilisation des résultats.
for the
C'est-à-dire quoi?
use
C'est-à-dire,
of these
on a fini
results.
l'évaluation des recommandations
So we said
formulées.
we've
Ces
carried out
recommandations,
an
ce n'est pas nous qui les
assessment.
formulons, c'est les pays qui les
There
formulent.
are
Ce ne sont pas des
recommendations that the
rapports
countries
nationaux.
themselves come up with.
Donc,
These are
rapports
national
nationaux, les
reports.
recommandations
So
qui
the
sont incluses
national
dans ces
reports,
rapports-là, c'est les pays qui les ont formulés.
and then the
Et quand
countries
c'est eux qui les ont
formulate
formulés,
their own
on
action
intègre
plans.
maintenant ces recommandations-là dans un plan d'action et on
And then,
demande aux
so this
pays de
is
nous
turned
indiquer
into an action plan, and we ask the countries to
comment ils ont suivi
indicate
ces
how
recommandations-là
they
et
are
de
going
nous
to follow
faire
the recommendations.
annuellement le retour sur
And
ce qui a été fait sur
yearly,
telle recommandation.
they
Donc, c'est
give
comme ça
us a
qu'on
report
comprend
on
un
what
peu
they've done
voilà, la mise en œuvre des recommandations.
to make sure they've been
En 2019, par
implemented.
exemple, en Côte d'Ivoire, je donne
And
l'exemple,
in Côte
en
d'Ivoire, for
2019, on a publié les
example, in
résultats.
2019,
Le
we
pays a
published the
organisé les États
results, and the
généraux de
country
l'éducation, voilà,
organized
pour dire que
a
celui-ci,
general
on va
forum on
quand même
education
résultat, beaucoup
to
d'actions ont
talk
été
about the
mises en
results, and then a
place
lot of
pour changer
actions were set
voilà,
up
les choses.
to be able
Et
to
donc,
change things.
ces états généraux, c'est
So
vraiment
this
ce que
general
nous suivons
forum
pour voir un peu
is something that
comment
we
la Côte d'Ivoire
monitor
a
to see
mis en
what
place ces états généraux,
Côte d'Ivoire is
comment c'est
doing,
mis en œuvre, comment
and
c'est
to see how
suivi,
they're
et puis aussi avec
implementing
des
these
partenaires
changes. And we're
comme
implementing, we're
UNESCO, comme l'AFD,
monitoring
comme
this
l'UNESCO,
with
voilà,
partners
c'est
such
pour
as
suivre.
UNESCO,
Parce
such as the
que
World Bank,
dans la prochaine enquête, dans les
because
résultats que nous
for
allons
our
publier l'année
next
prochaine, on
questionnaire,
essaie
so
aussi un peu
next
de
year,
documenter ces éléments-là
we will try
pour
to
voir,
document all
au
of
cas
this
où il y a une
to
progression
see whether things have progressed, and how to explain this progress. That's how what we're doing. Because you don't want to move forward or backwards without being able to explain it. You want to know exactly, okay, 5 years ago, this is what we decided to do. This is what we have documented. This is what countries have done. Here are the results. And then we also need what we call a yearly decision makers meeting, ministers, for example, and national assemblies, parliamentarians have to gather together in meetings organized by CONFIMEN to talk about policy and to see how the Ministry of Finance will be accompanying the Ministry of Education to provide the budget lines to ensure that all of these implementations can actually take place. To make sure parliamentarians, when they vote the budget, can perfectly understand the role of these assessments and these results in orienting public policy to implement policy, and then this policy not be blocked at the National Assembly because people don't understand the underlying ideas. But if you have an assessment and you could say, okay, this is what has been done, this is the progress that has been made, this is very useful to convince the deputies ahead of time, the parliamentarians. So quickly, that's what I have to say in reaction to your question.
Merci beaucoup, Hilaire.
Thank you very much, Hilaire. Thank you.
J'ai une deuxième question.
I have a second question. Stephanie, do we have time?
Okay.
Very good.
This time, this question is for Alejandro. And the presentation is really very interesting regarding all the aspects of the data and the approach that was shared. I was wondering, what are the main challenges that were encountered during the implementation of the study? What are the main challenges in that regard?
Sorry, I think my connection wasn't really strong enough. Can you repeat the question, Laura?
Yes. My question is, what are the main challenges that were encountered during the implementation of the study, CPLM study?
Thanks for that question, Laura. Well, I can say, for example, resources, because we're looking at, similar with PASEC as well and other assessments, large-scale assessments out there. We're looking at the breadth of scope of different localities and communities in each of the countries. So really, the challenge is to capture and be able to reach the farthest of the communities that needs to be part of the main sample. So I think that's one major challenge that we have encountered. But surprisingly, and in many other, of course, other studies would also confirm this, that there's seems to be very high participation rate of our samples from students, teachers, to even to parents. There's again, this is coming from a cultural standpoint where in the region they see surveys or questionnaires as opportunities to actually share some of their ideas and opinions. And since this is government led, there's already an assumption that they would push for greater, stronger, and higher participation rate in many of our studies. So I think that's the context in the region. And typically, aside from the resources, these are some of the challenges that we're encountering. But so far, we're overcoming this. I guess one of the good thing as well in the program is that we are flexible. There's a strong space for flexibility even in the administration. I'm not sure with PASEC or other assessments, but in CPLM, we have a huge window. We're looking at alignment with national calendar, for example, to administer the assessment. So in terms of timing, in terms of proper and adequate administration of these tools and questionnaires, we are already aligned, very much aligned with national priorities. So there's not much accommodation that countries does because we are aligning our timing and priority with their own respective national priorities as well.
Thank you so much for the response, Ali. So it's almost 1:30 Paris time. We still have 5 minutes. So I have one last question. And I'm sorry, we have a lot of questions in the chat and even among the participants who got the document. But we have to close now. But if you would like to have more information about CPLM, PASEC, you can go to the website and to look at the methodology report. Maybe one last question for Ali and Hilaire is about is there a burning question today for the countries in terms of health and well-being? Is there a burning question that the minister would like to have data on that? Hilaire, donc j'ai une question. Est-ce qu'il y a vraiment une question brûlante aujourd'hui que les ministres
So are
sont
there any
extrêmement
burning,
intéressés
repeating
pour
the same
cette
question in
question
French?
au sein du
Are there any
PASEC?
burning questions?
So maybe Adi, if you would like to.
Yeah. Yeah,
In
I
a
think I
minute.
will. Yes, I'll try to respond, Stephanie. I can say perhaps in some of our countries, there's now a strong push to address occurrences of bullying. For example, in the Philippines, they made a strong position starting in 2023 when they reviewed the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013, where they actually did a congressional hearing to assess the implementation of the law and to review the implementation of the law. And one of the findings that CPLM showed is that there's strong prevalence of bullying across localities. So we're not looking at only rural areas, but also in urban areas, and again, across gender demographics. So we're seeing a prevalence of this phenomenon. And because of that, that triggered the Philippine government, in particular the Senate, the Senate Committee on Basic Education to do a public hearing on the review of the 2013 Anti-Bullying Act. And when that review came out in 2020, it started in 2023, and in 2024, and I think early 2025 of this year, they're about to launch the revised law with a revised implementing rules and regulations, or the IRR of the law. And that law already stipulates mechanisms in which to report and capture cases of bullying, because our data, although very much aligned as well with the data happening from the secondary school, because they also take PISA and similar range. We're talking about 60 to 68% range of bullying. And so what they did was to implement set of mechanisms as part of the IRR of the law to put in place some reporting mechanisms from across various levels of governance, from the classroom up to the highest level, or the central office in the Department of Education. So we're now seeing countries understanding the push for data, or the push for change coming from what the data is telling us. So again, this is part of what CPLM is pushing, which is the evidence to policy linkage, to understand that actions will not happen if it's not informed by compelling data and compelling evidence. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Ali. And yes, it's still current challenges, not only in the region, but everywhere. Hilaire, peut-être une minute, juste pour
Maybe in just
répondre à
1
la
minute,
question,
if you could answer my question. So any burning questions for the ministers or participating countries taking part in PASEC? This is a, do you have a lot of pressure to collect data? Yes. Well, when a country commits to the assessment, they commit to their responsibility. So we don't have any pressure, but we have pressure to see the results. Otherwise, we have agreed on the calendar with the ministers themselves, so everything is going well. But pressure is really to get the results. And so we're doing our best so that we can publish the results very quickly, because sometimes people say, okay, it's taking too long. But it does take some time before we can release them. We have to be able to clean up the data, to finalize them, analyze them, so that they can really be published. You can't publish things that aren't publishable. So that's what we have to do first. But a lot of people, and then once we have the results, we can do our work and all is going well. But yes, pressure comes a lot more from our activities on the ground. Some of the contexts are extremely difficult, and we really want to thank the IAP assisting us working day and night in sometimes very difficult conditions to reach these schools. So that's what I can answer in response to your question.
Thank you, Hilaire,
Pour ce partage.
for
Moi-même, qui ai fait
sharing
partie du
this
SACMEC pendant
information.
15 ans, je
I
me rappelle,
also
tout le
worked
monde nous demandait des
on
données pour le
SACMEC for
lendemain.
15 years, and everyone was actually
C'est assez
requesting
compliqué.
for data
Écoutez, il est l'heure de
with very
clôturer
stringent
cet atelier
deadlines.
régional. Je
So it's time
souhaiterais
to
tout
close the
d'abord
regional
vous remercier
workshop. I
chaleureusement,
would first of all
Hilaire et
like to thank
Ali,
Hilaire
d'avoir
and
accepté de participer
Ali
en fait 2 fois
for
dans ce cours.
having
Une
participated
première
twice
fois pour
in this
présenter
course.
le
The
PASSEC ou
first time was
CPLM
to
en détail
present
et aussi pour
PASEC and
participer à ce
PLM in
webinaire
detail,
ouvert à
and
tous.
then
Donc, je vous remercie
the webinar
chaleureusement
here.
d'avoir
So I'd really
accepté.
like to
Vos
thank
présentations étaient
you
extrêmement
both warmly. Your
intéressantes. Je suis sûre que
presentations were
vous
very
allez voir,
interesting,
il y a
and
énormément de questions
I'm
qui vous
quite
ont été
sure there are
posées.
many
Donc, une
questions
nouvelle
that
fois,
were
n'hésitez pas
raised.
à regarder le
So
site
please
du
do
PASSEC
not
ou
hesitate to
du
take a look
CPLM si
at the
vous avez besoin de plus
CPLM
d'informations.
or the
Vous
PASEC
avez les
website
rapports
for any further
méthodologiques qui
information.
sont disponibles.
You have the
Concernant le
methodology
cours,
report
n'hésitez
that's
pas
available.
aussi à regarder
Now,
la fiche
please
détaillée
don't
sur le cours
hesitate to
qui est
look
proposée
at the
chaque année.
course
Donc peut-être
catalog
l'année
that's
prochaine ou d'ici 2 ans,
proposed
on est en train de pourparler.
each
N'hésitez
year.
pas non plus
So
à regarder le site web de l'IPE.
do take a
Et
look at the
enfin,
IAP
j'aimerais
website.
surtout remercier
Last
tous mes
but not the least,
collègues
I would
derrière de
like
l'IPE
to thank
qui
all
m'appuient
the
donc pour
colleagues
délivrer
who are
ce
here
cours,
at the IAP
pour préparer le webinaire,
for having supported
pour la
me
traduction, nos
in
interprètes. Nous
in the
sommes une grande
preparation of this
équipe.
webinar.
On a à peu près une dizaine de
And
personnes
I
derrière
also
et
would like
je
to
voudrais les
thank
remercier
the
chaleureusement.
interpreters.
Voilà.
We're about 10
So
people
thank you so
in the
much for
team.
participating to this webinar. Thank you so much, Ali, for your presentation and Hilaire. Et je vous remercie aussi à nos interprètes et à toute l'équipe de l'IPE.
Also, I'd
Et
like
je vous
to
dis à
thank
très bientôt.
the interpreters and
Merci
the
à toutes et à
IAP
tous.
team.
Et à
Thank you,
bientôt.
everybody,
À bientôt.
and see you
So much.
soon.